Hello everyone, this is Badger Goodger, and today we're going to look at the hidden debug features which were used to test GTA 3 in the past. Before we go any further, I wanted to thank Firehead for finding and explaining these interesting debug features to us so that we could show them to you. And I hope you don't forget to thank him either for the exclusive material that you will only see in this video. Without any further ado, let's finally start discussing these debug features. Before we get into the thick of it, do you know what debug or debugging actually means? To put it into simple terms, debugging is the process of finding and resolving defects or bugs within a game. And to make it even easier for you to understand, let's look at the example. Right now, you are looking at the real debug feature, which was used by the developers to render object collision and hitboxes in real time. These elements represent an invisible layer of the game which we don't see, but that we can nonetheless interact with by messing around in the in-game world. Could you say that it was very important to debug these elements, at least visually? Of course, that was the reason why they made and used this feature, and here's an example of how they could do it. Some of you might already know that there's an invisible but solid object at the gas station in Portland. You can't ram it, nor can you go through it. If you really wanted to, you could jump on it. I guess we've all experienced similar bugs in the past, and there isn't much we as gamers can really do about it. But if you were a developer, then you could just enable this debug feature and look around this place. As you can see, someone put a collision box here. Of course, it doesn't make any sense why it should be here, meaning it's a bug. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a debugging process. Now, there's no doubt that gamers don't really need to have these secret development tools in their games. Not to mention, the game sometimes uses too many resources to process them, wasting the performance for nothing. As a result, the developers usually try to remove debug functionalities from the normal version of the game. They usually tested the game by making a special debug build of the game, which has tons of debug features to mess around with. And speaking of a debug build, in 2013 there was a lucky dude who had in his possession and tried to sell an Xbox development kit with the debug build of San Andreas. Back then no one had a clue if it was real or not, nor did anyone know where he got it. According to these unique screenshots he provided, the game was filled with debug functionalities. Just look at this screenshot. It turns out this render collision lines debug feature survived till at least the GTA San Andreas era. Hell, if you're familiar with the official Brady Games guide, then you'll find this yellow text very familiar as well. Well, this build was legit. Wonder where it ended up going. By the way, if you have a debug build or even a beta build of a GTA game in your hands, then you can contact us and see if we can work something out. But since we don't have such builds in our hands right now, we'll have to show you what Firehead managed to find in the final version of GTA 3. If you don't remember, or didn't know, GTA 3 was initially developed on the PlayStation 2 platform. This is important because the developers used a special developer console by the name of PS2 Tool. You can occasionally see them on the old photos of the developers' lairs in Scotland. This special console combined both a PC on Linux and, of course, a PlayStation 2. Both of these platforms had their own video output. And hell, I can't ignore the fact that the dev console was huge. Just look at the retail PS2, it's so small in comparison with the PS2 Tool. Since the game was initially developed on this console, the developers came up with a cool trick. They used the first controller to play the game, while a second controller was used to debug the game. Interestingly enough, we can actually activate this functionality even in the final version of the game, and special thanks for this goes to AAP. By using the second controller, one thing the developers could do is activate a special debug camera. In other words, it's a free camera which allows you to fly around the map and go just about anywhere. Just think about it. This is the official camera hack in all its glory. I bet the developers used it a lot during their testing sessions. Additionally, this camera also allowed them to teleport Claude at the camera's current coordinates as I'm showing you on this footage. Thanks to this feature, we can appear, for instance, in front of Sam Hauser inside of the ammunition he works at. And what can we do here? Well, we can give him a high five. So yeah, you can teleport yourself anywhere and it will take you only a couple of seconds to do so. I guess it was very convenient to use in the past. The teleportations work even if you're driving a car. Thanks to this, you can now teleport yourself into the car crusher and see what the game will do about it. Well, I guess Claude's gonna be recycled into scrap metal, and the game won't even crash either. I'm 99% sure the developers tried to debug it in the past. I think. But the debug camera wasn't the only option available on the second controller. The developer could also speed up the time and test how the game changes day and night cycles, change the weather, and here's a fun fact for you about that. According to a different version that we have, the game could also reload a time cycle file. And finally, the developer could disable the in-game HUD. This is what a typical gamer can't do unless using a mod or a hack. You don't have to be a genius to guess that they use these features not only to debug pesky bugs in the game, but also to make some juicy pre-release screenshots and trailers for us by following these simple steps. activate the free camera, disable the HUD, make an interesting scene, and voila, here's a good screenshot to share. On the other hand, the developers sometimes didn't have a lot of fun debugging the game. One of the features that they probably didn't have fun working with was process slow mode. If this mode is enabled, then you have to hold one special button on the second controller to normally play this game. But as soon as you release this button, the game will freeze. Starting from this moment, the game won't even allow you to trigger the pause menu, leaving you stuck in a limbo. Just press and hold that button again, and the game will allow you to play as if nothing had happened until you release it again. During the freeze, you can press another button, and the game will proceed by just one frame. It seems like the developers used this special mode to analyze something frame by frame. I'm gonna guess it was a very tedious job to do, but no one said that all aspects of game development would be fun. But anyway, don't forget that this game was developed with tons of missions and various tasks for us. If you didn't know, these elements are controlled by the game scripts, which are stored in the main.scm file. If a developer was given a task of testing them, then he could make special game scripts by adding an extra debug thread before compiling them. This thread enabled some extra debug features, which could be triggered once again via the second controller. Thankfully for us, they left these compiled scripts and their sources in the mobile port of the game. So what are we waiting for? Let's take a look at them. Right after you click on New Game, in a couple of seconds you will appear in front of Luigi's Club with tons of cash in your pocket. And in case you didn't notice, there are no missions on the map, but thankfully these debug scripts allow you to select any mission you want. The game even shows you the mission giver at the bottom of the screen. When you select a mission, it doesn't actually start, but instead the game creates a marker on the map so you could get there to trigger the mission. Does this mean the developers had to use a debug camera to get there and step on the mission marker to play? Not really. Instead, these special scripts allow them to appear near the markers by teleporting him forwards and backwards. I guess they just teleported Claude until they appeared in front of the right place, and only then they selected the mission that they wanted to play. Yes, this does seem kinda goofy, but at least it worked. Interestingly enough, as soon as you appear on another island, the game will open all roads leading to this island. If you teleport Claude back, then the island will be closed. For some very strange reason, this option is missing in the leaked mission sources. What's even more interesting is that there are no road on and road off strings in the game's text files, which is a mystery. If during a playthrough something went wrong, then the developer could easily end Claude's misadventures by exploding his head. This is how they could fail a mission. And if the developer was driving a vehicle and tried to do this, then the game created a massive explosion which sets the car on fire. After all, if something goes wrong during testing, why should the developer continue playing the mission, if he could just press this tricky button combination and end it like that, or by exploding Claude's brain? Well, instead of just being able to end Claude's adventures like that, they also implemented some kind of God mode in these scripts, which they could enable or disable on the fly. For some very strange reason, they decided to reuse the same button that disables and enables the HUD. As a result, it's pretty hard to notice this feature if you don't even know about its existence in the first place. In my honest opinion, this invulnerability isn't as good as you might think. First of all, it won't protect you from the water, because water is still very dangerous for Claude. Secondly, it won't save you from an explosion while you're sitting in a car, which is a shame. On the other hand, you can easily mess around with the missions without thinking about your health status or worrying about getting shot. Furthermore, these debug scripts also allow the developer to enable and disable a special debug flag in the game scripts. When this flag is activated, the developer could visually check coordinate zones and involved entities for the mission. In other words, thanks to this flag, you can now, for instance, see how your partner 8-Ball moves around the ship during the bomb to base mission. It's no secret that it works quite simple. You can also check if a help message appears when you enter this invisible scripted zone. Do you see how Misty is highlighted? Well, that's because she's used in this mission as an entity. As you can see, it was a good tool to debug these things. Fun fact, the variable which activates this flag is called debug crap in the mission sources. And there it is, folks, the true humor of Rockstar Games in all its glory. Well, in this case, eternal glory. The developers also decided to implement an interesting cheat mode into these debug scripts, which they could enable or disable. If this cheat mode was enabled, then the developer could trigger some additional cool features like some kind of slow motion. I guess this feature was used to help them make much better screenshots and get footage for trailers, because why wouldn't they use it in such a way? Doesn't this scene look cinematic to you? What's more interesting is the fact that you can trigger slow motion even if you're driving a car. In other words, everything looks epic in this mode. Don't you agree? Without any doubt, the feature definitely looks cool, but when you activate it, the game physics might break. For instance, if you activated it while in motion, then be prepared to experience the strange bug where the game shoots Claude out with a huge force. Luckily for us, there's a God mode, but without it, be prepared to see the wasted screen a lot. Fun fact, this can happen to PEDs too. I mean, just look at this thing. It's kinda strange to see how the PEDs are just falling from the sky and all the other messes that happen while using slow motion. Maybe these bugs occur due to the outdated code, but who knows. I also wonder if it was intended to ram cars with Claude when you activate this mode. If that was the case, then we can take a look at these particles. Usually you see them very briefly, but not with this mode. Moreover, you can take a look at the shell casings. If this was intended as well, then the developers could debug them in an interesting way too. What I like the most about this feature, though, is this scene. I bet the developers knew how to entertain themselves while testing the game because, you know, debugging is a boring thing to do. If the developer pressed another button, then he could turn moving cars off. That means you won't see pedestrians driving cars around the city anymore. Hell, now nothing can stop you from driving recklessly around the city, apart from parked cars. Just avoid them if you can. If they press that button again, then Liberty City will be flooded with cars again. But what was the point of implementing such an option in the first place? Let's pretend that you're a developer working on the game, but you can't concentrate on your work because all these pesky drivers are whining and constantly honking at you and they're getting in the way. Well, what can you do? Just turn them off. I wonder why they didn't do the same with the talkative PEDs. Furthermore, thanks to these debug scripts, the developer also had an ability to save Claude's current coordinates in a text file with the name of temp_debug. Cool thing is, the game stores them in rows, meaning the developer could leave some notes after the coordinates and maybe pass the file on to another developer so he could check these places. At least I would do it like that. If you thought it would be a cool idea to have a vehicle spawner in these scripts, then you're totally right. The developers had the same idea. They could spawn or even despawn any random vehicle that they could get. Sadly, the randomization is clunky, but at least it works. If the game refused to load a vehicle, then the game would display this text below. As a result, the developer had to find what was the cause of the problem because it shouldn't be like that. Fun fact, according to the mission sources, the ability to recolor a spawned vehicle was removed from the debug scripts. Technically speaking, they disabled the code from this feature in the sources, meaning it's possible to bring it back. After compiling the new version of these scripts, the feature works flawlessly. As you can see though, the color is totally random, and I bet no one expected to see a blue ambulance in this clip. If a developer turned cheat mode off, then he would lose all additional debug features, but at the same time he would have received a new ability to change the weather. Technically speaking, it is the same option as I showed you before, but this time they implemented it in a different way. The game even shows you that the weather has changed. Furthermore, the game doesn't reload the time cycle file. I think it's safe to say that this was an alternative option to use. Of course, the game developers could debug in-game missions by using many other different methods and ways, but sadly, we don't know about them, with one exception. Thankfully for us, they forgot to remove the debug stuff in release function. This strange thing basically returns on-screen the value of an opcode. The first value in every single row represents the number of an opcode, while the second value returns either true or false. For instance, by looking at this example, we can clearly see that the isPlayerSittingInCar opcode returned true, and we can't argue with that. But it would be bad if it returned false while sitting in the car. I hope you get the idea. I don't think the developers would have been required to constantly use these full game scripts with debug threads in the past, because there was no need to use them if their goal was to just check the map or something else. In this case, I bet the developers used another set of game scripts, simple ones, which, thankfully, were left in the mobile version of the game with their sources. Let's take a look at them. By using these scripts, the game spawns Claude on the famous Callahan Bridge with 2 cheetahs nearby. According to the mission's sources, those cheetahs are named as test cars. They also decided to reuse the famous vehicle spawner, this time with a fully working recolor functionality. Sadly, that's pretty much it as far as what you can do with these simple scripts, and I guess there was no need to have the rest of the features from the debug game scripts. Fun fact, according to the mission sources, the variable, which stores spawned cars in memory, is actually named Magic Car. But that shouldn't come as a surprise. I mean, after all, this thing falls out of the sky with an ability to change colors. Can we say that it's an obscure Easter egg? And lastly, the official name for these simple game scripts is Test Script for Industrial Level. If you didn't know, Industrial is Portland, where we are initially spawned. And now, be prepared for a mystery. If you launch a retail version of GTA 3 on the PS2 tool, then you'll notice that the game still outputs formatted text on the second screen. This cool glimpse shows us that during the game's development, the developers used the first screen to play the game, while on the second screen they analyzed exactly what the game loaded and how fast, which file it opened, and other important stuff that we don't even understand. Honestly, it's strange that they decided to leave this option in the final version of the game, because your retail PS2 can't even display this stuff. On the other hand, if you play this game on the PCSX2 emulator, then this text will appear in the output window. But do you know what's so special about this formatted text? Well, there's an interesting Easter egg which only the developers could see. If the game detected that in some .ide file a PED or car path coordinates repeated, then the game would display the following text on the second screen: "Aaron is too chicken to eat meat," and then the game will show the place where they repeated. Looks like someone was making fun of Aaron Garbett, who is the art director of GTA 3. Was he a vegetarian back then? If I had to guess, I'd say he probably didn't like this Easter egg any more than he liked meat. And don't forget that this game is from 2001, so it's gonna have some blocky models and wacky animations. Have you ever wondered where they could test or debug them in real time? Well, they could probably do it in this special Animviewer mode with a black background. Within this mode, the developer could rotate the selected model, zoom in or zoom out with a camera, and play various pet animations. More options from this mode are available on the Xbox version, where for some reason the background isn't black. This is a bug, so just ignore it. So, in this mode, the developer could also look at other pet models, transport, wheel models, weapon models, and other in-game models. According to the code, if a developer selected a vehicle, he could reload the car colors file. If you didn't know, this file contains the car color data. If a developer selected a PED, then according to the code, he could reload a file which stores pet animations. Judging from the leftovers we have, this mode definitely had some more options in the past, but unfortunately, they were fully cut from the final version of the game. But hey, we are very lucky to even know about its existence. Speaking of pedestrians, did you know the developers tried to make complex AI in this game? Yeah, that's right. And in order to debug it, they used this special PED text feature, which displays above all nearby PEDs their state, objective, personality, and even their wait state status. In other words, thanks to this feature, the developers could see what the pedestrians are doing or thinking about, and if there was a bug in their behavior, then they could have fixed it using this. Pretty cool, huh? Of course, we don't really need to know this much information about their behavior, but I must note that the developers did try their best to make this behavior interesting and complex, and I guess we should probably thank them for that. Have you ever seen these mysterious screenshots with version 3.0 or PR labels on them in the past? A lot of people thought that these screenshots were photoshopped because these labels do look kinda cheap. But it turns out these screenshots are legit, because there's a display game debug text function in the game which can display the build version of the game on the screen. The retail PC version of the game, for instance, is marked as version 1.0. Thanks to this function, by using a tricky combination on the second controller, the developer could also activate this additional debug line with Claude's current coordinates and a map zone where we are currently located at. By using a slightly different combination, the developer can enable a similar line, but this time with the FPS counter. This is a very strange choice of information to display, but I bet the developers knew more about what they needed to see to properly debug the game with this function. By the way, have you ever messed around with the menu editor in the past? If that answer is yes, then you might have tried to bring this unused submenu by the name of Menu Debug back into the game. Sadly for you, these options don't seem to work anymore. The thing that you can enable by messing around is this strange flickering effect. According to the game code, this menu was initially introduced in the PS2 version of the game, and thanks to the other versions that we have, we can finally show you what these options do. Thanks to Reload IDE, the developer had an ability to reload some sections in the GTA 3.ide file while playing the game. However, the code from this option seems to be outdated as it crashes the final game. Thanks to the Reload IPL option, the developer had an ability to reload some IPL files and reinitiate some other things of the game while also playing the game. If you want to know more about this option, then it's best to pause the video right now. Unfortunately, this option crashes the game as well, and once again, you can blame the outdated code. Fun fact, this function also tries to reload unexisting IPL files, which are now missing from the final version of the game. Looks like in the early days, the islands weren't divided into a few files. I wonder when they decided to do that. The next option in this menu activated the already known debug flag in the scripts. It looks like the developers could enable this feature either in this menu or by using those debug game scripts triggering this feature from the second controller. The big white debug light switched option is one strange damn thing in this menu, and I will explain to you why. If you activate this option and use the debug camera, then you will notice a big white debug light under the camera. There might be a chance the developers used it to test how the in-game light will spread or lie on the collision. This is a great example of where you can see a difference between a model and its collision. This would be a pretty strange thing to use if you wanted to look around dark places, don't you think so? If this option was enabled in that menu, then by pressing a specific button on the second controller, the light will go off for a short amount of time. I guess that's the reason it was named Switch, but what was the point of doing it? It's a pretty strange thing. If you turn Show Ped or Car Road Groups on in this menu, then the game will highlight for you so-called treadables. The treadable is an object with road properties. Interesting thing is, the color depends on the mysterious flood fill parameter, and you can read more about it by pausing this video. According to the formatted text, the game states that there are 87 flood fill groups for pedestrians and only 4 groups for cars. For some reason, the game lies by 1 unit, but let's look at the smallest group, the car group. If you turn Show Car Road Groups on, then we can clearly see a pattern in these groups here. Everything that the game highlights in red has car paths. Everything else that's highlighted in green doesn't have them. That's how we can distinguish between at least 2 groups out of 3. The problem is, the pattern breaks in this place, which is highlighted in a blue color. This is the same place that the formatted text warns you about because its car nodes aren't connected with nearby objects. On the other hand, there are 86 flood fill ped groups, and as we know, there are only 7 colors, meaning that the colors repeat. As a result, it's pretty hard to distinguish between similar objects. But this option isn't completely worthless. I noticed that in this place there's a pattern. As you can see, peds from the yellow zone for the most part stay inside this yellow zone, but peds from the cyan zone can easily go into this yellow zone and maybe get back to cyan. It's not known how the developers could use this option to test the game, but I wanted to say special thanks to AAP and Nick007J for the additional information about this option. In my opinion, Show Collision Polys is a dangerous option in this menu. If you enable it, then the background will immediately start flickering. If someone in a development team suffered from epilepsy, this would be a bad freaking tool to visually check model collision with. On the bright side, thanks to this tool, the developer could, for instance, find holes in the map where the player can fall through and respawn nearby, as I'm showing you now. I guess that was the reason for implementing this annoying flickering effect, because despite its seizurific look, it kinda helps spot these holes. As you can see, the collision has different colors. These colors represent the type of surface. As a result, the developer could also check if it uses a proper surface type. And I've got to say, I find it very interesting that this option only triggers the flickering effect on the PC version. I wonder if it was even intended or not. According to leftover code, the parse heap option should have displayed information about the memory load, which is dumped into a text file with the name of heap. It seems the developers used this text file to analyze RAM load during the play session. I guess this was very important to do because the PS2 is only 32 megabytes worth of RAM. Sadly, the Show Cull Zones option doesn't work with any version that we have, but fortunately, we know what it did in the past, and special thanks for this information goes to AAP. This option was meant to show statistics on screen about how useful the zone culling is. It was very important because these special zones help the game hide these places under certain circumstances for better performance. If you didn't know, they're located around the entire map, and you can see this in the map viewer made by AAP. It is kinda sad to find that the Debug Streaming Requests option doesn't work in this menu. Judging from its name, this option would have had something to do with streaming. On the bright side, we are still lucky enough because some other versions have 2 streaming debug features which we can activate with the second controller. When the developer would trigger the first combination, the game would display to him a list of things which were loaded by the game during the resource loading time. By triggering the second combination, the developer could see a list where the game showed him what it was going to load. Just know that it was very important to optimize the streaming. Thanks to the hard work of the developers, we as the players don't suddenly see a loading screen when the game would try to load something into the memory as if you had traveled from one island to another. Interestingly enough, if you take the first mobile port of the game and connect a controller to it, then you'll be able to debug rendering in this game. For instance, you can disable the game's ability to render pedestrians in the game, and that's what the name of the Don't Render Peds function says as well. All that's left of the peds are their shadows. When you trigger the Don't Render Objects function, the game will stop rendering objects which are listed in the object.dat file. I bet you could guess this function just by hearing its name. It's worth noting that when you disable the ability to render something in the game, it doesn't mean that these things just vanish. The game still loads them, it just doesn't waste any resources to display them. The next function is called Don't Render Water, and this is exactly what it does in the game. By using this feature, the developer could do something like see how various objects are placed underwater. Pretty cool. Sadly, the code from the Don't Render Vehicles function seems to be outdated because when you trigger the function, you'll notice that the game stops rendering boats, but not the rest of the vehicles, which is strange. Here's a cool tidbit for you. If you enable this feature and enter the boat, you can imagine that you're a flying Dutchman or maybe on an invisible water ski. It's pretty funny to see that you're operating an invisible boat making bubbles and waves behind you. Maybe they would use this to debug those too. The next function on our list is Don't Render Buildings, and this is exactly what it does in the game as well. Technically speaking, the word buildings in the code means static map objects, so don't mix this up with other objects like LODs or anything else where the rendering can be disabled by using other combinations. What can you do with this? Well, I noticed that if you enter a car and drive, then you can see how the game activates low polygon models, or simply put, LODs, in the distance. I guess this feature could be used to debug them in the past. The next function disables the ability to render so-called big buildings. This is what the developers called previously mentioned LODs in the distance. I assume that the developers could use this feature to see how the game loads static map objects, but who knows. I wonder why they love the word building so much. Interestingly enough, you can actually disable the game's ability to render every single thing that we've already talked about. If you did that, then enjoy the emptiness. Honestly, it's interesting to drive around the city at night when the game looks like this. Just look at all these strange reflections and light sources in your way. You know, it might give you a small clue to understand how this game was made. It was kind of intriguing to spot another feature with the name of Aaron's LOD multiplier near the Don't Render functions. I wonder if this was coded by the same guy who was too chicken to eat meat. Sadly for us, Aaron's feature doesn't work in the final game, but there might be a chance the developers used it at one point to set a proper view distance, at least on the consoles in the past. Back then, everyone had the same hardware and it was easy enough to test in real time. Did you know that this game has a very complex path system? I won't explain why, but I wanted to note that it was very important to debug it in real time by using this display path data function, which you can see on your screen right now. Just know that properly coded paths means that the streets will be properly flooded with pedestrians and cars without seeing abnormal things in their trajectories. Of course, it was also possible to spot empty places on the map, meaning the developer could go and fix them. It's also possible to see where the pedestrian paths end, like here. Or to check dummy places like here. Despite the fact that you see pedestrian paths here, they won't appear here because the pedestrians are disabled by the script. If they were enabled, then the player would notice that the pedestrians here act very strange, not to mention that the game spawns them behind the cliff. Starting from the PC port of the game, the developers decided to implement another submenu. This time they decided to call it Debug Menu, and once again you can bring it back by using the menu editor. Yet again, you will be upset to know that nothing works here on the PC, but thankfully, other versions can give us a clue as to what these options could do. By setting the right button for toggle pad game/debug and pressing it, the first controller could become the second one. I guess the developers knew that there was no reason to use two controllers to debug the PC version of the game. By setting the right button for turn debug camera off and pressing it, the game could activate the debug camera. At the same time, the first controller would become the second one as well, and vice versa. By setting the right button for take screenshot and pressing it, the developer could take a screenshot of the game. Sadly, this feature doesn't work in any version that we have. By setting the right button for show mouse pointer and pressing it, the developer could possibly see a mouse pointer of the game. However, that is just a guess because there's no code left over from this feature and it's hard to understand why it would even be needed. Speaking of the PC version, it turns out that one function without a name still receives a ton of debug information. The game doesn't use this information, and it's a mystery where the game could even display it. On the other hand, we could take a guess and say that this might be a log, which could have been used to analyze something in the game. This game had a console once, but how can it be a console if it doesn't allow us to input text here? Well, at least in the current state that we found it. Also, it's unknown what it could even display here because there are no clues left in the game code, but we can always output here what we want. Fun fact, it's possible that this was captured on this photograph that we have from the developers' offices. It means that they used it in the past to debug the game somehow. You know what else is strange? Seeing pre-release screenshots with debug text in the official Brady Games guide. I can clearly see a tidy up word here and two float values. There's also a chance that you can see these on photos from the developer's studio, but unfortunately there is no way to say what the string even meant because it seems that there is no code left over from this feature. You might be able to spot more debug features on the rest of the photos from their studio, but once again, we can't say for sure what they mean unless we find better photos or at least code from them, which so far we haven't. Of course, the developers had more debug features in their game, but since we don't have a debug build of the game, we can't look at them. Honestly, we are too damn lucky to at least see some debug features, and not to mention, all of this was found in the final version of the game. If you want to see some more videos about the beta versions of GTA and other stuff that I just come up with, be sure to check out my channel, Goodger, and don't forget to follow both Vadim and I on Twitter. Until next time, this is Badger wishing you a wonderful day, night, or whatever it is where you are. Take care.